In the early 70s, the Stanford Research Institute launched a program unlike anything before it. Its mission was simple: to discover one psi phenomenon that was capable of being reproduced at will. They did. They called it remote viewing. The general description of remote viewing is the capacity to describe a person, place, or location in great detail to which you have no access to generally other than through mental means. One figure quickly stood out. Pat Price, a former police commissioner, turned out to have extraordinary psi abilities that have never been matched. His talents placed him at the center of one of the strangest chapters of the secret science in intelligence history. Admiral Stansfield Turner, former CIA director, talking about Pat Price, remarked once, "We once found a guy that could see anywhere in the world through his psychic powers." While working as a contractor for the SRI research project, Price launched his own personal initiative, a scan of the planet, in which he used remote viewing to search for hidden activities and psychic beacons. His claim was extraordinary. There are 4 secret stations on Earth, hidden deep in remote mountain ranges and not built by humans.
One of our remote viewers that was really good came up one day and said, I was looking around and I think I found a UFO base on Earth. This was during the remote viewing era, and one of the places he came up with some, but one of the places he came up with was Mount Zeal in Australia. And so my CIA contract monitor says, well, I know the station keeper, CIA station keeper out in Australia. I think I'll call him, and I won't tell him why I'm asking, but I'll ask him about Mount Zeal area. So he gave him a call, and he said, I'd like to ask you about that Mount Zeal area. He says, oh, you mean where the UFOs are always flying around?
Whoa.
So I thought, oh, gee, you know. So this was from Pat Price. I take him seriously.
Though tentative, it was seen as partial confirmation of Price's data. But let's pause for a moment. Why would you believe anyone who simply walked up and told you this? Why would anyone even bother to check such wild claims?
Well, when Pat Price came to Hal Puthoff in 1973 and set a file down on Hal Puthoff's desk and said, you might be interested in these UFO bases, he had a tendency to believe him a little bit more than your average guy because he was able to provide this other information, this other remote viewing information so well. He did such a wonderful job. He had no particular axe to grind. He wasn't looking to be famous. And yet he came in 1973 and put this file on Hal Puthoff's desk saying you might be interested in these UFO bases.
Skip Atwater, the later head of the CIA Stargate project, was interested as well, for one main reason. Pat's sessions were repeatedly accurate, unbelievably accurate. As word of Pat Price's talents spread through the intelligence community, requests poured into the SRI. Before long, he drew the direct attention of the CIA, which hired him away from the lab. What Pat Price did for the CIA remains a mystery. His files have never been declassified despite repeated FOIA requests. Only indirect testimony suggests that he was involved in advanced intelligence research into additional military applications of psi phenomena.
It's kind of a branch office of it, which is the remote viewing stuff that Hal Puthoff and the Targ and those guys have been involved in. That's really sophisticated stuff. I mean, really sophisticated stuff. When you know what they accomplished in that program, which they're lying about to everybody. Say, oh, well, it didn't get very far. They kind of shut it down.
Even more mysteriously, just 4 months after beginning work with the CIA, Pat Price was dead. But the story didn't end there. The CIA's Stargate program carried the research forward, assigning a new generation of remote viewers to follow Price's trail on non-human intelligence stations. Among them was their rising star, remote viewer 001, Joe McMoneagle. What he uncovered defied all expectations.
I find a lot of difficulty in describing any of this because I have never ever seen anything that even remotely resembles any part of this target.
Before we continue, it helps to set a slightly broader context. Trace humanity's long pursuit of the big three questions. Who are we? Where we came from? And where we're going? Inevitably, the trail crosses religion, the paleo-contact hypothesis, and the possibility of extraterrestrials. On the surface, these appear to be separate ideas. In reality, they are two sides of the same modern misunderstanding. Looked at differently, the picture becomes clearer. True understanding of our nature has been latent within humanity from the very beginning, since the first appearance of intelligent life on Earth. In parallel, beings we call extraterrestrials, in one form or another, might have been present throughout Earth's history, participating in its evolution. What does that participation look like? If we accept that the tree of life reaches through multiple layers or frequency bands of reality, and that consciousness is a continuum that does not terminate in humans, then Enrico Fermi's ironic question, so where is everybody, begins to resolve itself. We do not usually see real extraterrestrials, not because they do not exist, but because civilizations capable of interstellar or intergalactic travel often inhabit levels of reality that are invisible to us. This is a hypothesis, yet it can be read between the lines of mainstream science. In the strange non-locality of quantum entanglement and the rising interest in the dark sector, dark matter, and dark energy. As Professor Lisa Randall has suggested, dark matter might even harbor life. Invisible civilizations could, in principle, be living right under our noses. From that perspective, we can speculate that non-human intelligences travel not across the visible surface of space, but via inner-frequency tunnels, threading a multi-dimensional multiverse.
You know, the idea that it may be a scout coming by from some other planet and checking us out and heading off or whatever. I mean, there's much more than that. And of course, as you know from interviewing Jacques Vallée, he dug into literature and found out, you know, you can go back millennia and see descriptions of exactly what we're talking about today.
This raises a startling proposition. Intelligences that have coexisted with us since the remotest antiquity, but inhabit a different domain of reality. We share the same space-time matrix, but use it differently. Candidates sometimes floated include plasma life and even neutrino-based life as entities tied to the dark sector. And at the heart of this mystery must be consciousness itself. All signs suggest that the techno-magic of the UFOs and UAPs from these hidden domains is built upon its physics. From this perspective, Price's extraterrestrial bases look less like alien outposts and more like something from the coexisting world linked to our material grid. In an intermediate domain, in a space between the solid material world and the other side of reality, the realm of consciousness. We will return to this thought later. Meanwhile, Skip Atwater, the new head of the CIA's Stargate program, studied the manuscript Pat Price had left behind at SRI. It described 4 locations said to hide the bases: Mount Zeal in Australia, Mount Hayes in Alaska, Mount Inyangani in Zimbabwe, and Mount Perdido in Spain.
This is kind of an overview of what we're going to talk about today and some of the things that he said about these underground UFO bases. He said that they had a primary purpose, and this had to do with something called reinforced BTL implants, transporting of new recruits, and an overall monitoring function. He said that the occupants of these places looked like Homo sapiens, looked like us. He went on further to say that there was a difference in the lungs and the eyes and so forth, but just to the casual observer, they looked like us. He said they had the ability to use thought transfer and can induce instant sleep and can somehow control people's functions through these advanced mental powers here. That's kind of an overview of what was said. We're going to go into some more depth.
In the late 60s, Pat Price, then 50, joined the Church of Scientology, a turning point he believed awakened his psychic abilities. Because of that, his manuscript uses specific terms from Scientology's vocabulary, but they are useful metaphors, not literal technicalities. Like any religion or spiritual system, it brings its own lenses. None are uniquely correct, only differently useful. One such term is the Between Lives implant, or BTL. According to Scientology lore, this implant is not a single thing or event. Each time the body dies, and the essence of the soul passes through the Between Lives region, hostile forces or implanting machinery allegedly repeat hypnotic commands, false visions, and conditioning. That repetition is what strengthens the implant's hold. Every cycle of death and rebirth drives the programming deeper. So, by reinforcing BTL implants, they mean the reimposition and tightening of that hypnotic conditioning, the processes that, in their view, keep the soul trapped, forgetful of its true nature, and more difficult to free with each iteration. According to Pat Price, the four bases shared a central purpose tied to reincarnation and the arrival of those who visit this world, though each site seemed to serve a different role. In his notes, he described them as follows: Mount Inyangani, the Primary Maintenance and Technology Center; Mount Hayes, focused on weather and geological control; Mount Zeal, the Personnel Hub, responsible for staffing all bases and serving as an introduction point for Homo sapiens; Pyrenees, the main base.
Mount Perdido is in the Pyrenees, and that's between France and Spain, this range of mountains here. This is an interesting place to report where there might be a UFO base. There have been a number of sightings of UFOs around the Pyrenees Mountains, and there's a famous set of caves in the Pyrenees where there are ancient drawings of ancient astronauts, perhaps flying spacecraft and things like that as well. Looking at that base closer, these are some of the things that were reported by Pat Price about this particular base. He calls them local units, and a propulsion system that looks like, and I put that looks like in italics because it's a comparator. You have to be careful when you deal with remote viewing. When people use similes, metaphors, and comparators, it's like they can't describe it directly, so they use something similar to it. So when he says looks like, we can't say it is artificial electromagnetic field. There are some sort of detectors. They seem to be worried about being discovered. This is the little sketch he provided of a propulsion system. It was 1973 Pat Price remote viewing sketch. Remember the sketches that were produced that I showed you before of the dome and of the derrick, the tower, and so forth and so on, and judge this drawing with that kind of accuracy. This is a picture of one of the local units of UFOs, and it's kind of hard to discern here. Let me see, it's a three-dimensional kind of drawing here. This is laying down, the saucer shape is laying down, and this is the top dome of it, the crown and the keel down here. He's drawn it as though it was transparent. And he says that from the crown to the keel, the center of this saucer-like device would be 40 feet, and the width of it would be 120 feet.
Pat Price reported that the personnel appeared human, essentially indistinguishable from Homo sapiens, except for key differences in the lungs, heart, blood, and eyes. These organs, he noted, were adapted for easier movement into and out of Earth's atmosphere. The description recalls ideas from Hindu tradition, where for thousands of years, gods were believed to converge with humanity by taking on avatars. Price even remarked that the skin tone of this station personnel had a bluish cast. Other ancient traditions also spoke of intermediary forces, a kind of celestial council responsible for earthly affairs. In Babylon, they were called the Apkallu, in Sumer the Abgal, in Chaldea the Genii, and in Jewish tradition the Bene Elohim, the sons of God. The Book of Enoch goes further, naming the leaders of these beings, those who descended, took human women as wives, and who taught forbidden knowledge. The second station, Pat Price reported, was Mount Inyangani in Zimbabwe.
There seemed to be kind of a different function to this base, even though all the bases work together. This base looked like it was some sort of a maintenance unit. Parts being welded in a vacuum chamber. Now, again, I'm a really big doubting Thomas here, and it's not because I don't believe in UFOs or remote viewing. I mean, I'm in the business, right? But I don't think these guys flew from, some nebulae 14,000 light years away from now and got a welding torch at Sears and Roebuck. So he seems to be observing something and yet laying on top of it his knowledge of welding. Whether these ships come from other dimensions or other planetary systems in the universe, welding is something that we do locally in our physical world with our physical things. So he might have been looking at something that wasn't exactly welding and yet called it that. Here's some drawings of some things that he saw there, interesting kinds of devices.
The next site Pat Price reported was Mount Hayes, Alaska.
About Mount Hayes, Pat Price said that there were similar kinds of security measures. There seemed to be a preoccupation upon the part of the occupants. They did not want to be discovered. Things that they did were not so much menacing or destructive things, but an extreme amount of attention to the idea of not being discovered as to what they were doing.
He perceived an area filled with computer equipment, but likely saw something technologically unfamiliar and again described it using familiar concepts.
We were looking at detecting radio signals of some kind that would indicate that they themselves had been discovered. It's not like they were, making their own radio broadcast or their own Saturday night television show, but they were interested in detecting anything that might reveal that they had been discovered. It sounds a little ominous in some cases here, that they are dispatching people to do unusual things. Let's say we were going to launch some sort of a probe that would look over this area of Alaska carefully. They might interfere with that probe. That sounds kind of ominous in some way. This even sounds a little bit more strong, that they have penetrated or infiltrated our government in some way. Not so much to control our government or our processes or the people, but again to prevent detection in some way.
Price identified the third site as Mount Zeal in Australia, noting it served a different function, possibly as a personnel center. He described it as a gathering place for various people from all the sites.
So he goes back to the site after throwing them off and says there are vehicles here, because there are different kind of IDs on the unit. And Mount Zeal has personnel for all the bases. He says that we ought to approach this area with caution, again, because he was detected there and because these folks seem to be very, very concerned about being detected. So we ought to approach those with caution.
So, what exactly were these four places? Later, remote viewers described them as both ancient and technologically advanced. But before we follow that trail, recall the primary purpose Pat Price assigned them: reinforcing a between-the-lives implant, transporting new recruits and maintaining overall monitoring. A striking parallel appears in Soviet ufologist Vladimir Ajaja's book, Other Life. In one chapter, exploring the link between UFO phenomena and the afterlife, he describes encounters with an otherworldly scientific institution, introduced as the Abrenocenter, a name that was explained as life outside life. According to the author, the Abrenocenter runs multiple stations on Earth and elsewhere. Its representatives explained it this way: the Earth doesn't prepare us. It's a segment of life meant to finally bring us purification here. They insisted they were not spirits, but representatives of an extraterrestrial civilization. They claimed the ability to move through invisible domains and said they were not bound to a single planetary system or even a single universe. We can make any star or planet alive. There are many addresses. I, for example, live in the Cygnus system. Again, these intelligences describe travel not across the visible surface of space, but via interfrequency tunnels, threading a multi-dimensional multiverse. They explain that they overlook incarnation on Earth, claiming it happens in two cases. The first echoes Hindu ideas of reincarnation. The second is a more complex issue, linked to aspects of their social order. When asked if they are similar to humans, they answered yes, then added, "We are you, only a little better. When you return, you will understand."
A very powerful dimension of this phenomenon is what I call the double identity aspect. The experiencers, as they're called, will often experience themselves as aliens, that they have a whole other identity as an alien. And from that perspective, they see computer-like often all of what we're doing to the Earth. They may be involved in human alien, they being the alien reproductive processes, creating the hybrids, and from that perspective, they will often feel that that alien self represents the lost souls, in a sense, of human beings.
Taken as testimony, metaphor, or even modern mythology, the overlap with Price's reports is striking. It adds depth to the term non-human intelligence, not necessarily alien, but a layer of something larger bridging our world and the other life domain. Naturally, as with any communication system, not everything that passes through those mental channels is true or a cosmic revelation. Nor are all the voices on the other end necessarily literal extraterrestrials. Still, those caveats don't alter the core point. The core is simple. The universe is threaded with life and intelligence, and each individual mind is embedded within that larger whole. But if the cosmos is saturated with intelligence in many forms, the question becomes, why would our small backwater planet be a focal point for supposed throngs of invisible visitors? Surprisingly, available data give us little solid, verifiable answers. But there are hints. To clarify, consider an allegory, a reminder of the Avatar movie. There, the colonizers' single aim was a rare mineral, abundant among Pandora's natives, but of little use to them. It may sound strange, but the truly rare thing in the universe that Earth has in abundance, the argument goes, is the human body. But because of particular physiological limitations, we do not recognize the value of our own embodied form. It's plausible that other intelligences with dense bodies understand the multi-layered architecture of consciousness, that the lower self should be aligned with higher floors of mind. The higher the floor, the greater the unity of consciousness. Why is it important? Because shifts between frequency levels might tend to happen collectively.
So people ask, well, why do these aliens look so humanoid? Why are they, if they're really some otherness, why do they look so much like us? Well, one of the answers there, and this is, I'm not saying it's true, but this is one of the areas where I have a fair amount of data, is that people experience that we both began separated from a common source. There was a common ground of being where we separated, became densely embodied in the form that we are. The aliens remained less embodied. They are part of our being, but they are seen as emissaries from the source, the capital S, or home, or God, or the divinity. Again, we don't, all these are loaded words, but we have to have some language to talk about the the ineffable, what Wittgenstein called the ineffable. We don't have language for that, and that we were split off and separated, and that one of the dimensions of the many, many dimensions of this phenomenon is the bringing together of our alien self, that alienated soul self, with the physical embodied self to become whole once again. So that it really isn't two species joining, but a completing of our own identity and wholeness.
Seen this way, the metaphors of a segment of life for purification and of hidden stations, places that prepare and oversee recruits from different worlds, begin to make sense. Perhaps most striking, their technologies may have been crafted from the very fabric of consciousness, a physics of mind stuff we are only beginning to suspect.
What I do believe is that it has an awful lot to do with consciousness, that they're monitoring us, trying to gauge our state of evolution of consciousness, because that's a very big deal to them. They use it to drive their craft, to navigate. They telepathically communicate. That this whole thing of the level of consciousness that we're at is really important to them. I mean, as we get to the issue of the UFO stuff, there's all kinds of issues that are involved in consciousness, in the states of consciousness, the elevation of consciousness, all of that stuff, which relates tangentially, at least, to the LSD. That is involved in the UFO stuff. The entire remote viewing process, the entire psychic process, all that stuff with Hal Puthoff and with Russell Targ and all those folks. That whole element of consciousness is a very big deal. It's all part of a specific phenomenon, and as long as you confine it to looking at the UFO stuff. The fact that the UFOs appear to be navigated telepathically, for example, and that the craft have built into it some kind of an AI capacity to respond telepathically to the control of the pilot. That's pretty far out, when you get into that stuff. And so the whole question of how telepathy works, what are the physiological aspects of telepathy, and remote viewing? The stuff that Pat Price could do. How the hell do you explain that?
It seems the ancients understood these mysteries better than we do, at least conceptually. We, instead, inherited strict taboos on the study of consciousness, laid down at the very dawn of science. The Church, seeking to guard doctrine, banned anything resembling occult inquiry and silenced or destroyed many of the era's boldest voices, Giordano Bruno among them. At the same time, thinkers like Galileo and Descartes chose to step aside, excluding inquiries into the physics of spirit and consciousness from science, judged too dangerous to pursue. A psychological barrier was erected and conditioned, severing Psi research from serious mathematical and physical study. Not much has changed since then. The Church has never apologized for Bruno's execution, one of many killed for the crime of free thinking. And modern science, free from the Church's control, has no idea of the physics or mathematics at the root of consciousness. But not everyone fell into this trap. Some intelligences, it appears, placed their bet elsewhere, putting consciousness at the core of their science. By doing so, they didn't merely pull ahead of us, they advanced light years, mastering even the foundations of physics we still treat as ultimate. Open science routinely dismisses psi phenomena as pseudoscience. Yet behind closed doors, in the shadow world of intelligence and the military, psi has long been the subject of serious interest and experiment.
During the space age, we have increased the knowledge of our universe 1,000-fold. Today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you, we say, we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers. There are places to go beyond belief.